Welcome back to the daily Living Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class. We are learning the laws of interest. Quite an interesting but also intricate topic. Let's start with a brief summary. So for starters, we spoke about the seriousness of this mitzvah, how careful one needs to be not to charge interest, not to pay interest, and not to be anywhere in between the two, the lender and the borrower. In fact, interest needs to be refunded. Interest comes also in the form of extensions. If you're paying a fee to extend a loan, then that's interest. It also comes in the form of gifts, whether they give it at the time of the loan or they give it later, it's a problem. If a person gives a loan on condition that they'll get a loan in return to a larger amount, that would be interest. In fact, interest is any form of benefit that the lender takes any form of benefit from the borrower. Some of this is interest by the sages, but interest nonetheless. In fact, even verbal benefit is also considered interest. If the lender asks the borrower to inform him of information, that's a form of interest. Then we spoke about sa b'sa, lending produce, and the idea is that if you are borrowing an item and the price goes up or down, so unless the difference is negligible, you actually need to borrow the produce by value, not by item. So if you are borrowing, if you're in the industry and you're borrowing, I don't know, a ton of sugar, like literally a ton of sugar, and you're going to return a ton of sugar, and the price fluctuates considerably, meaning not just negligibly, then you would have to rather determine the value of the sugar that you borrowed and then return that value rather than the sugar, because otherwise you would be possibly paying interest, giving back more than you took. Then we spoke about delayed payments. Okay, so if a person asks if he could delay payment, or as a result of a person's delayed payment, he'll need to pay more, that's also a form of interest. So if you're selling a car, and you tell the person that, you know what, you don't have to pay me outright, I'll let you pay it in installments, but then I'll need to sell you the car for a higher price, and that's also a form of interest. We spoke about a loophole of selling debts. In short, if I need money now, then I can sell a document that somebody owes me money to a third party. So if a person owes me 100 Rand, I could sell that document to somebody for 90 Rand. That way I have the 90 Rand now, and he'll get back 100 Rand later. Although he is giving me a 90 and he's giving 100 Rand back, it's not a problem because it's two separate transactions. So, however, if I would take responsibility for that first loan, then it would be a problem. For example, if somebody owed me 100 Rand, and I sold that bill of debt to somebody else for 90 Rand, and I told the buyer of the bill of debt that if he doesn't get paid, that I will cover him, then it would be that I'm just the agent, and then that would be interest. Well, then we spoke most recently, I think that's where we're up to. We're up to advanced payment. If you didn't follow everything I was saying until now, that's fine, because now we're moving to a new point. So just like we spoke earlier about delayed payment, meaning that I'm not allowed to charge more in return for somebody paying me later, because if I'm charging more in return for someone paying me later, it means that I'm actually charging him interest for holding on to my money. So the reverse is also a problem. It's a problem for me to charge less for advance payment. So let's just give a practical example. If I want to sell a car. I want to go into we're talking about cars. Maybe let's talk about phones. So I want to go into the phone industry and I want to sell phones for 1,000 Rand a piece. Okay. Now, I don't have money right now to go ahead and purchase these phones. So I say to somebody, you know what? I'm not going to have the phones until January. If you pay me up front, then instead of charging you 1,000 Rand for the phone, I'll charge you 900. That's a problem. Why? Because he should be paying me 1,000, but I'm giving him 100 Rand off since he's giving me money in advance. The regular process is that you pay for something when you get it. But if I'm asking for money, if I'm saying that by you paying me a month in advance, I'm going to charge you less so that I have the money in advance, that's interest. I am paying him interest. I am paying him in the form of 100 Rand discounts. I am paying him 100 Rand off in order to be able to have his money. Why do I say his money? It's a loan, because until I've given him the phone, I'm not entitled to it. If I had the phone ready now, then it's not a loan, it's a sale. But if I don't have a phone, how can he pay me for something that I don't have? So until I receive the item, his payment is actually not a payment, it's actually a loan. And as a result of that, I'm charging him less for the item. So that would also be a problem. Unless, if I already had a phone in my property now, and I, in theory, could have given him the phone right now, but I said that I'm only opening up shop in January, then it wouldn't be a problem of interest, because instead of looking at it that I'm giving him 100 Rand off to have his money before I'm entitled to it, actually it could be looked at as if I can be getting the money now, because in theory I could give him the item now, but we've just decided that will be delayed. So in summary, just as charging a person more to pay later is interest, where the buyer is paying extra to hold on to his money until later, the reverse is also a problem. It's a problem to charge somebody less for paying you in advance, because then the seller is actually paying interest to the buyer. The seller is saying to the buyer that I am giving you a discount as payment for you giving me money before I'm entitled to it, meaning that this is actually a form of interest. Let's take a look at it inside. We'll go through the text quickly. It is prohibited to buy grain or any other item by paying money in advance while the grain will be delivered at a future date, because it is possible that in the interim, the grain price will increase by the time the delivery is made, resulting in the buyer getting more than the value of his money, because he advanced the money. She's actually saying more than that. Not only are you not allowed to give the produce to the person at a discount if he pays you in advance, you actually should not take advance payments, full stop, because you might come to be taking less than you'll be charging later, which would be a form of interest. Unless, however, if the seller now has in his position all the grain that he is selling, though he won't be delivering to the buyer until a later date, then that's allowed. Because a man may sell whatever he possesses at a very reduced price if he sees fit to it. So if I already have the cell phones in my property now, so I'm not entitled to, I'm not required to sell them for 1,000 Rand. If I want to just sell them for 900, I can. So although I'm not delivering the cell phone until January, since I have it in my property, so it's not viewed as that I'm paying a fee to the buyer for holding onto his money in advance. In theory, I could have given him the item at the moment. However, if the seller, we just did that, this applies even when the grain is not yet completely ready, but still needs 1 or 2 processes for its completion. But if it still requires 3 steps to be completed, so if I have the phones, but they're not ready yet, they haven't been put together, so if it will be easily able to be put together, all we need to do is stick the battery into the back or whatever it is, then that's not a problem. But if these phones actually still require a lot of work before they're ready to go out to the market, then even if I have the material, that doesn't help because I don't have the item yet. Another option is if the price for the grain has been set. So actually, again, the Shulchan Aruch is not just saying that I'm not allowed to sell the iPhone for 100 Rand off in return for advance payment. He's actually saying I should not receive advance payment altogether. I should not be taking payment before I have the item to sell, because we're worried about interest. But if the price has been set, then I can. So if we already know that the iPhones are going to sell for 1,000 Rand, then I can get people to pay in advance because I know that the price isn't going up. We've set the price at 1,000 Rand. Once the price has been set, then there's no concern of interest, because whether he pays me now a month in advance or whether he pays me in January, he's paying the same amount. So I'm not paying interest by giving a discount by getting the money in advance because the price has already been established, even if I don't yet have the items in my possession. Even if the price does go up afterwards, the buyer derives no profit from his advance payments, since he could have bought the grain with his money at the current price. Meaning, once the price has been fixed, even if it changes later, that's not a problem. Since this transaction was made according to halacha, even though there was an increase in the price of grain at the time of payment, and the seller does not wish to deliver the grain that was agreed upon, the buyer is permitted to assess substitute goods to be delivered at a later date, or the seller must give him cash value at the present price of the grain. Let's leave it at that for now. It is quite complicated. And now we move to investments. One who has merchandise that sells here at a lower price, okay, and elsewhere for a higher price, okay. So if I sell, let's say I make these little wire, you know, those things on the side of the road, those wire, you could make out of wire a giraffe or a buffalo. And over here they sell for, let's say, 10 Rand a piece. And in New York, they sell for $3 a piece. Okay. And what happens? My friend says to me, give me this merchandise, and I will transport it to the place where the higher price can be obtained. Okay, so I go over now to the seller and I say, give me 10 giraffes at 10 Rand a piece. Actually, I don't say I'm not going to pay you the local price of 10 Rand a piece. I'm going to transport them to New York where I'll be able to get 30 Rand a piece. And I'll use the money for my own needs until such and such a time. And I will repay you according to what it sells for there, minus the expenses incurred in transporting and selling the merchandise. Okay, so again, in simple terms, I tell a guy, give me 10 wire giraffes, and I'm not just going to pay you 10 Rand a piece. I'm actually going to pay you 30 Rand a piece. Okay, I'm going to pay you 3 times the value because I'm not selling them here, I'm selling them in New York. Okay, it won't be 30 Rand because I will need to pay for shipping. So it's going to be 20 Rand. So instead of giving it to me for 10 Rand a piece, I'm willing to pay you double the price. I'm willing to pay you 20 Rand a piece because I'm selling them in New York. But I'm not going to pay you now. I'll pay you once I sell them. Obviously, if I have cash right now, I'd rather just pay the 10 Rand and then the item's mine and then finished. But obviously, I'm talking about a small volume. But if you're talking not about 10 Rand, but you're talking about 10,000 Rand, you're not talking about wire giraffes. You're talking about crystal giraffes or real giraffes, whatever the example is. So if I pay for the item now, it's mine, and I can go somewhere else and sell it for more. But if I don't want to pay for it yet because I don't have the funds, and instead I tell the seller, I will pay you when I get paid at a higher rate. So is that interest? Would you say that, look, had I paid for the giraffes now, I could have paid him 100 Rand. But since I don't have money now, and I owe him money because I'm taking the giraffes now. So what I'm basically saying is if you let the money sit with me, and instead of paying you 100 Rand, I'll pay you 300 Rand. So is that interest? Seemingly it is. The answer is, it depends what happens if the giraffes get stolen or break. On who lies the responsibility? This might sound really complicated, but this is actually very practical. I'll try to say it again in my own words in a moment. So if the responsibility of the giraffes, meaning if for whatever reason those giraffes are stolen, does the seller need to supply me with another 10 giraffes? If the seller does need to supply me with another 10 giraffes, then it means that it was still his until it was finally sold. So then it's not like I owed him money and I only paid him later because it actually wasn't mine. I was just acting as his agent to sell them in New York. But if when the giraffes are stolen, it's too bad and the loss is on me, so then what does that mean? It means that that the first sale took place already, and I should have paid him because it's already mine, and I didn't pay him, and since I'm paying him later, I'm going to have to pay more. So that's interest. So the question is on who the responsibility lies. Let me give you another very practical example. Okay. Let's say I wanted to open up a Jewish bookshop. Decided I want to open up a bookshop to sell books. Okay. And I decided that, I'm going to do it at amazing prices. I'm going to get them in the States and I'm going to bring them in at low cost. And I'm going to sell books for whatever it is, 100 Rand a piece. So that's a no-brainer. But what's the problem? The problem is what happens if the books break? So now it boils down to who's going to take responsibility for the broken books. If I take responsibility for the broken books, then it means that I bought it at a set price and I'm selling it at another price. And it means that the books were mine and now I sold them for more, but then I have the risk of them breaking. If I don't want to suffer the risk of the books breaking and I say to the supplier that if they break, you'll have to give me new ones, then it means I'm just the supplier's agent. So then there's no concern of interest because it was never the transaction only happens later and I'm just acting as his agent and I'm just selling it for a higher price. Okay, so this is all about investment. And the idea is, and this is going to come very relevant to the next chapter, the idea is that depending on whether you do or don't take responsibility for the loss, that will determine whether it's considered a violation of ribis, of interest or not. Depending on who the responsibility of the item lies, that will determine whether the transaction is allowed or not allowed. When we come to the next chapter, chapter 66, we'll see that this is the workaround as far as how you can take a loan from a Jewish bank and somehow end up paying the lender back more because it's actually not a loan, it's a business venture. And the difference between a loan and a business venture is whose risk is it at? If all the risk is just on the borrower, so then it's a loan and then it's interest. But if the bank is willing to suffer a loss, if the bank is willing to take on responsibility, so then it becomes a business venture. And then there's no concern of interest. But we'll speak more about that, please God, in the next chapter. Back to the text. On mainland, he spent 100 dinars with which to buy merchandise at the market. And when they return home, the borrower may give him 120 dinars for it. So I could give him 100 Rand and say, I want you to pay me back 120 Rand. How's that not interest? Provided the lender takes delivery of the merchandise and transports it home. Since the risk of transit is on the lender, so then again, it's not a problem. If the risk of transport is on the borrower, so then it just means I borrowed 100 and I'm giving back 120 because the item was already mine because it's my risk. But if the risk is on the lender, then it means the item is not yet mine. So then there's no problem of paying more, taking 100 and giving back 120 because I'm not paying 20 for having held on to my own money. It wasn't my money, it was his money. It was just a joint business venture. And finally, if Reuben is traveling to a place where merchandise can be purchased cheaply, then Shimon is allowed to tell them, bring merchandise from there and I will give you so much profit, provided that responsibility for the merchandise rests with Reuben until delivery to Shimon. So again, this is in the reverse. The idea is that as long as the person that's paying more than he would have has the responsibility on himself, then it is interest, because then it means that he just borrowed money and he's giving back more. But as long as the lender or the person who's originally getting back more has part of the risk, so then it's not considered like he's charging him interest, rather it's a joint business venture. Okay, please God, tomorrow we'll discuss finally advance payments for property, for workers, a dowry for a wedding, and then the last discussion, which we'll maybe try to go through quickly because it's quite complex, are loans between Jews and non-Jews. But the principle will be very simple. We'll get there, please God. Thank you so much.